Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Today's video, we are going to hone in on table 1016, which is obviously in chapter 10. And I've got my textbook in front of me. I recommend that you have your textbook either here. I've also got it online if that's how you're doing it with the digital copy. Also, as with any study that I ever recommend that you do with us for your own study time, have some paper. I like to use the read, write, recite as a sort of general guide anytime I'm trying to memorize information. But remember, chapter 10, pretty important chapter because it is muscular training assessments. Let me go back here, flexibility assessments. So it's probably one of the higher priority chapters. Not sure how many questions you're going to get from it, but it has a fair amount of information that you need to know. So let me just kind of give you before I delve into that particular table, just a brief overview. If you have more than 30 days, 60 days to study, you should have done a full perusal of the textbook. And then each time you do a chapter, maybe do a quick perusal of the chapter before you then move into the actual studying. Depending on your study learning style, study strategies, remember there's different ways that you could sort of access the information to help you to memorize it. Remember, memorization is the beginning. It's the key to learning the information so you can regurgitate it on an exam. Again, keep in mind as well, not just the length of time you have to study before you sit for the exam. Look, if you've got 3 weeks to sit for the exam, you're not going to be going through all of these chapters. There are certain chapters that have a higher priority, meaning they are more heavily represented on the exam than other chapters. Keep in mind, you'll get at least one question from every single chapter. But the question is how many questions do you think they're going to give you from chapter 10? It's going to be a whole lot more than one question. And so it is a moderate to high priority chapter that you just got to keep that in mind. So if you've got 3 weeks of study before you sit, different study strategy than if you have 5 months. And so depending on where you're at, make that determination. Are you sitting for your exam 90 days, 120 days, 60 days, whatever that is? Now you've got to strategize from a studying perspective, but then you have to do the actual operational study strategy itself. Exactly how are you going to do that? Well, the general way is to sort of get a quick perusal through the chapter. Chapter 10, pretty long, by the way. You can see me going through here. Chapter 10, roughly, that's a pretty good amount. Let me get that in front of the camera. Pretty good amount there, right? So pretty good amount of information. The next thing that I normally recommend that you do, again, depending on how much time you have to study, is now spend time in each one of your subheading, your chapter areas of functional assessments, chapter 10, movement assessments, load speed assessments. Now, if you look at the chapter by chapter study videos that I've done in chapter 10, it's pretty much a not a breeze through, but it's more of a quick run through. And so if you go through that and just look at each one of these, read through them, try to read, write, and recite, memorize the information as best you can, that's great. But if you do have more time, now you can do what I'm going to recommend, which is grab a paper, pencil, and I'm going to give you, let me give you an overhead shot of this real quick, and I'll basically show you exactly what I do. Once I get to my chapter and I do a read through of it, now I come back to my initial part of the chapter and I look at my chapter headings. Okay, so functional assessments, bolded, dark, movement. So 1, 2, 3 main subheadings that we're going to work on. But within each main subheading, obviously I have these subtopics. So static postural assessment. Again, if you have the time, you would take each one of these and spend the amount of time you need on each one of these subheadings here until you understand and can get the information and do well on a practice exam answering questions related to these areas. So what I'll do, and you can see once I start studying, I'm going to use, you see I've got all these little markers as well. I'm going to use color markers. I'm going to draw pictures. I'm going to do whatever I have to do. I'm a visual learner, so I like to read it. I like to write. I like to draw pictures. The recommendation, of course, is that when you're doing functional assessments, if you are a tactile learner, this way you can look at me while I'm telling you this. If you're a tactile learner, make sure that you're using some sort of ball, squeezy ball, something that will allow you to distract that tactile need. And you just do that while you read and write. You get it? That's what I do. The other part of a tactile learner's need is going to be to physically do it. So the recommendation, for instance, the static postural assessment. Now look, I can read through this and I can write it and I can get the explanation and I can memorize it. And I got a pretty good feel for it and I can kind of conceptualize three-dimensional movements. But most tactile learners, you have to go static. You need to literally get up and do the assessment yourself, physically on yourself. Very helpful if you do that. You need to read and rewrite it for sure. But the tactile learner, you definitely need to add that element to it that will help you to appreciate and understand the actual assessment itself. So make sure you get up from reading and rewriting it and do the physical assessment, okay? This is where you'll have some students recommending and giving some really good tips in the Facebook group, for instance, saying, you do it. Get up and physically do it. Do them with yourselves. Do them with your friends. Do them with your family. Do them with anybody you can. Absolutely. But you got to also be saying it out loud. You've got to write it. All of those elements that are going to help you to memorize. And again, this is the deal with your learning style. If you don't know what your learning style is, you just go and take one of the free little tests that they have online, and it will tell you. You probably already know pretty much what kind of learner you are. This will just validate it and verify it for you. So if you're a visual learner, you're going to need to stop and take some time, get your brain and your eyes off the paper every 15 to 20 minutes, okay, and go do something else and then come back and do it. You may not have to, as a visual learner or an audiological learner, you're probably not going to have to use one of these, nor will you necessarily need to get up and do it. Although, like I say, it could help. But for tactile learners, it's critical that you do that. Does that make sense? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the front of the chapter, and I'm simply, again, you got to I use a lot of paper, folks. I don't know how you get around this. I really don't. The read, write, recite method is still, as far as I know, and from what students continue to tell me, I've been doing this for a long time, they say that's like the best technique they've used. Okay, so I'm literally going to, okay, let me give you an overhead shot again. So you kind of see what I'm doing. Functional assessments. And I've shown this before in some other videos, but functional assessments, right? I'm going to write that down, and that's all I'm going to focus on right now. Okay, so I've got functional assessments, and like I say, I could write it with colored markers, I can draw a picture or whatever the case is. Static postural assessment. Okay, now this is what I'm saying to myself in my brain. Okay, gotta stop. Let me go ahead into the chapter now, and I'm going to go and I'm going to find my, okay, functional assessments, do a quick read, and now I come over here to the static postural assessment. One of the things that I highly recommend you do is when you're doing this, look for any bullet points, right? Because that's a key indicator that they've basically taken material and they've collapsed it into a shorter explanatory situation for you. And what I want to do now is, maybe it's going to be a little easier if I pull this out and share my screen, because ultimately you can watch and do what I'm doing, but I wanted to move you right to table 1016. So you get the idea. All I'm doing, like I showed you here, is I would write it down, go to it, and start that process. So if I'm on page 431, so now I'm going through each of these. Keep that in mind. I'm not going to go through every single one with you on this video, but imagine now I've gone through static postural assessment. I've done all of those things related to the beginning part of this chapter. Okay. So I've done the static postural, static balance, dynamic. I've gone through all of that, and I've gone through all the tables. Now I basically get to the bend and lift assessment. I just want to focus on this and kind of help you understand a little bit. So here we are, table 1016. Okay, let me get me out of the way. And here's what you kind of want to think about when you attack these tables, so to speak, is look at the view. So the view here, and they've done this for you because they want to show you the anterior first. Now, you can do that. And if that works for you, then basically if you're watching the screen right now, I'm going to do the table just like, let me show you real quick here. Okay, can you see this? Let me go ahead and open this up a little bit more for you, and we'll look at it side by side, right? So I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this table, and I'm going to basically rewrite it over onto my sheet of paper. This is a technique that you can use that's going to help you to memorize the table. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not as important as ultimately knowing what your compensatory issues are, right? So the compensations, overactive and underactive muscles, right? I hope you understand, you must memorize these columns right here. But here's one way you can do it. One way is to look at it from the perspective of the view itself. So looking at somebody from the front, right? So I can write down anterior view. If you want to write front, you can write front, right? And I'm going to have anterior, and I'm basically going to take the table that you see right here, and I'm going to rewrite it. Yes, I know it takes a little bit of time, but just do it anyway, because that's one of the ways you memorize it. So I basically rewrite the whole table. Once I've done that, did I memorize it? Probably not, but I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to do it again, okay? I'm going to do the same thing again. Now, here's the kicker, is you could, if you wanted to, listen to me, if you want to, I'm not saying you have to do this, but it's recommended if you're struggling with memorizing it, you got to switch up the way you're memorizing this table. And here's how I do it. It's really, really quite simple. Let me get back to your overhead shot. Instead of memorizing by view, I memorize by location. And so you'll notice that the anterior, right? It's all bundled by the anterior view, right? So I'm looking at the individual straight on. And now I'm looking at the different joints of the body, the feet, the knee, and the torso. Feet, hip and knee, blah, 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 lumbar, right, or head. You could, and this could be very helpful, is when you're rewriting it, okay, when you're rewriting your chart, start with location. And now look at the feet. What are all the different things that can happen at the feet? If you look at the feet from the front, you get this compensation issue with these compensations, overactive and underactive, and you would write those out. Get that? You can look at the feet from the anterior. You can look at the feet from the side. See what I'm doing? So feet from the front, feet from the side, and that's all you need, right? Because you're not looking at the person from behind, are you? No. So feet from the front, feet from the side. Then what you would do is look at the knees from the front. Knees from the front, anterior. Knees from the front, anterior. And then hip and knee, hip and knee from the side. Right, now we just do the same thing. So knees from the front. See how I'm doing this? And then knees from the side. And basically all I'm doing is now I'm just copying straight across the same thing. It's this rewriting of the material on here that should help you in the memorization process, okay? So that's just, again, this is a simple kind of straightforward technique that basically breaks up the information acquisition flow, so to speak. So acquiring the information, engaging it and acquiring it into your brain to memorize it sometimes requires that you take it in a little different way. Does that make sense? You started from the view. So if I look at the person from the front, I can look at the feet and the ankle. Then I can look at the knee, and then I can look at the hips. Okay, that's one way to do it. And when I look at the feet, I notice that the gastroc, the lateral or the medial gastroc is this, the soleus is this, causes this underactive, this is overactive, whatever the case is. Yes? Now I can go at it a little different way. Instead of doing it from the view, looking at it from the front, it might help me to actually look at it and go, let me just stay at the feet for a second. If I look at the feet from the front and I see this compensation, okay, I get that. Now let me look at it from the side. At the feet again, I'm staying at the feet. And now I can kind of see and understand the entirety of the compensations that occur at the ankle and the foot. That makes sense. Okay, then you do the same thing with the knee and the pelvis. And by the way, that's sort of the essence of, give the an overhead shot. So that is basically the essence of how I would rewrite this this table 1016, right? And that was the bend and lift assessment squat pattern, and that's basically what you're seeing here on page 430. So break out your paper, your textbook, or your digital copy of your textbook. And I'm just pulling this back up. Digital copy of your textbook, and that's how you get down and dirty and get to work. Look, at the end of the day, folks, you got to get to work with the studying. It's just you don't want to be inefficient and effective in your studying. So this is just kind of a little tip that can actually help you to memorize some of this material, which ultimately helps you to get the answers correct on the exam, which helps you to pass the exam. Hope that makes sense. This is, again, table 16, chapter 10. You can do this with any of the tables in here. Again, the technique, this one technique I'm showing you is basically to switch up how you start with the memorization and developing your road. You could do it the way they have it, by view, foot, knee, right, hip, whatever, head. And I'm not going to say or, and you can switch it up, and now instead of just the view, anterior, lateral, you can do it by the joint or that kinetic chain checkpoint itself, which is the foot and ankle, for instance. And then all of the side and front view at the knee, and memorize those underactive, overactive compensations. That way, it shifts it up a little bit, and it may trigger your brain. Now, you got to do that. I don't care what your learning style is. You need to do that. I know those of you. That's why for the tactile learner, while you're doing this part of it, that's what this helps with. Without this, what are you doing? You're going, you're going like this, right? And you're fidgety, right? You need that. You're getting distracted. You need some tactile distraction. Now, that's when you'd be surprised. Give it a try. You grab this. And now, while you're squeezing, grabbing that, go ahead and start rewriting your columns. Look, I wish there was an easy way. I wish all you had to do is like take it and put it in there. It doesn't work like that. Okay, you got to get down to business and you got to work. And one of the best ways to do it that I have found for you tactile learners out there, use this. But that's the part where you're reading and rewriting. But what does a tactile learner really now need to do? Watch this. I'm going to share my screen with you again and do it. Literally get out there, get away from the camera, right? Put me on pause and actually look through it and go, okay, key compensations. Let me actually do it. Now, again, you doing it, it could be a little bit of a challenge. I guess you could use a mirror if you wanted to and actually watch it. But the best thing to do is get your friends, get your family, and have them do the actual assessment. You want to learn the compensatory issues that are going on here, what compensations are. Literally, watch this. You would literally have your person that you're doing it with, have them do it. And take your time with it. Stop, and then say, point, and say the muscles that are, you know, overactive or underactive. That makes sense? For you tactile folks, you're sitting here thinking, well, how am I going to do this? Well, make the table real by having a person do it. So I would literally see here where it says anterior. Go to the person that you're doing this with. Go to the person's foot and point to it and hit it. Lack of foot stability. Ankles collapse inward, right? The feet turn inward and the toes turn out. Well, you can do that and you can look at it and you can point at it. And then what do? Point to where the soleus is. Okay, where is the soleus, right? It's the muscle that lies underneath the gastroc. So when you're looking at a person's calf back here, it's the muscle that lies underneath it. Point to it. There's a lateral aspect to it, to the gastroc. There's a medial aspect to the gastroc, right? That's the diamond-shaped muscle, right? That's the more superficial muscle. Soleus lies underneath. So what do? You say it out loud. See, you say it out loud for the overactive compensation. And that's what I do. It's really that simple. If you're going to do it and you got somebody to actually do it with, point to it. Point to it and say it out loud. Remember, you've got to connect some of this information. Again, I'm talking about tactile learners in particular. By the way, this works for pretty much anybody, but if you're an audiological learner, you're doing that so you can say it out loud, and that's what helps you to engage the materials when you're hearing it. Everybody, please understand, everybody benefits from doing the hands-on, whether you're visual, reading, writing, tactile, whatever it is. It's just that the prominent learning style component that you have demands that you do certain things. Again, if you're a visual learner, you got to use colors. You got to. Maybe you don't need to do it with somebody like we're talking about with table 1016. Maybe you don't need to point to somebody. Maybe you can memorize it, but the way you're going to memorize the over and active muscles so you can get the question correct, pass the exam, is you may have to use colors. A tactile learner, for instance, it doesn't matter to them. They could care less what they're looking at. They need to be distracted while they're doing the reading and the writing. But boy, once they get up out of the chair, right? They get up out of the chair and they go over and they say, hey, Joe, hey, John, hey, Mary, come on over here. Do me a favor. Stand right here for a second. And you go through the process. That's going to be very, very helpful. But here's what I don't want you to do as a tactile learner. Don't just do that. Get it? You still have to do this. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I can go on for forever and ever on these topics. Your ability to study efficiently and based on the way your brain, the way your gray matter absorbs the information is critical to getting this stuff down. So look, I focused on table 1016, but that works for pretty much all the tables in chapter 10. If you have any questions on what we went over in this video, please let us know. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. It's always helpful. We're putting information out on there all the time, and you don't want to miss any of it. It's going to help you ultimately to pass your ACE exam. It's very important that you let us know specific questions. Make them very specific. This way, I can approach them as efficiently, as effectively as possible to help you, and then of course to have you pass or get those questions correct, and then pass the exam. Let us know how we can be of assistance. Have a great weekend. See you. Bye.